Okay, guys, welcome to the 18 Summers Candid Conversations podcast. As you guys know, we like to try to simplify and strengthen family life. And we're getting a lot of activity right now. As you can imagine, no one saw coronavirus coming. We have this new combination of work at home, school at home, economic unknowns, just really a new world than it was from just a few months ago. And we're here with my good friend, Philip McKernan. As Philip and I don't like to admit that we're friends because we like to give each other a hard time, but we've been friends for over 10 years now. And Philip is one of my favorite people in the world of not only business and personal development, but he's been a good friend and challenger in my life. When I needed to get clarity in my life, and I think that's what he really hangs his hat on. He helps people find clarity in tough situations. That's what one of his gifts are. And he's helped me in my life to find clarity and directions with my business life, my personal life, and has helped me personally with some of the biggest challenges I've ever gone through, whether it be financial, personal, relational. And that's why I've brought him here, because I know it's going to be a very candid conversation and something he'll be honest about. And talking before this, what's interesting, Philip, is, and again, why don't you say hello to the gang out there of 18 Summers?
Hey guys, thanks for having us. Really appreciate being here.
Yeah, so obviously we've been through the ringer together for over a decade, but as we've discussed in the last week, in our private conversations, it's very interesting. What really brought you and I together in one way or another was the 2008 meltdown. And we both had gone through severe pain, business challenges, real estate investment challenges, you know, where really our overall identity and self-worth started to almost get wrapped up in that. And I remember as you and I became friends, it was hard to talk about. But what do you recall of 2008? What can you call off of from that time in 2008 that kind of gives you reflection or even validity of today?
I've actually tried to forget it, quite frankly. I think I've been in denial and trying to forget some of the pain. It was arguably the most painful, challenging period of my life. So just before that, we had moved basically to Canada at the time. I don't remember exact dates and sequencing, but we moved to a country we pretty much knew nobody. And what I genuinely didn't remember until literally 2 days ago, is my wife said to me, "You do know you set up a coaching business in the summer of 2000, I think it was the summer of 2008, in a country we didn't know anybody, and something I'd never done before." So it wasn't like we left Ireland with a coaching business and arrived in Canada and set up a coaching, but it was a brand new business, brand new country. And honestly, I look back, it was the most challenging time of my life. It was the loneliest, most isolated, scariest. We lost everything and more because we were underwater to hundreds of thousands of dollars or euros in debt from the banks. So we owned properties, and anything we owned just was a disaster. And in amongst all of that, I decided to do something that really scared me and something that I really wanted to do. So it was a really challenging time. However, it's sometimes not until you look backwards in time, that is the time that I think I created friendships in my life. And as much as it kills me to say it, one of which is yourself, Jim. I have to be nice today because Jamie's watching.
You don't have to be.
No, I don't have to be. No, but seriously, myself and Pauline, actually, that defined our relationship. That brought us together in a way that we couldn't even articulate or imagine at the time. We couldn't explain it. We didn't have a strategy. They often say that money is the greatest stressor and the thing that is responsible for breaking up most couples. I personally disagree. I think what it does is financial pressure and stress begins to expose the cracks that have been in the relationship for a long time, or in the relationship for a period of time. Yeah. So what it really forced us to do is to face the little ugly conversations that we didn't want to talk about.
Exactly. Well, in little ugly conversations you don't want to talk about. First of all, thank you for that clarity. The fact that one of your most important relationships actually in this dark time got deeper, stronger, and it's now no doubt a guiding light and source of just all sorts of things right now. But at that same time, so you found something good, but the uncomfortableness. I love how you talk about the uncomfortableness, and I kind of want to dig into that because I think that's important here. I remember you and I sitting in Toronto, Canada in 2009 at the Tilted Keg. We had already known each other for about a year, and me finally basically breaking down and saying, "Philip, I'm scared. I'm really scared. I've come this far. It looks like we might not go bankrupt, but I have friends and family's money on the line." And we had known each other a long time. We had tons of jokes together and some adventures, but I remember coming clean with you. And then you saying, don't you understand? I don't look less of you. I look more at you now. And let me tell you what I've been through in Ireland. And it was just an opening right there. I'm sure you remember the Tilted Keg, Toronto. It was an incredible conversation. We were there for hours. But we had kind of, I like to look at both you and I as authentic, but we kind of held that back from each other and probably getting to know, but there was some sort of self-pride where I didn't want to tell you that day. And I think vice versa. But why do you think that is? And do you think that made things harder on us back then where we didn't want to talk to anyone about it?
Yeah, I think we're being, well, I do remember that for two reasons. One is I remember you'll never forget a real genuine moment of vulnerability. And the second thing is I still have the receipt, because to date, you still haven't bought me a drink or lunch. I still have the receipt from that time. So they're the two things I remember. I can't help it. I just have to keep digging. But anyway, on a serious note, the challenge, and I'm going to say this with a lot of love and respect, and it's very hard to say what I'm about to say because we're in a climate where hundreds of people are literally dying in various countries around the world. Obviously, Italy being one of the hardest hit at the moment. I still believe that the greatest pandemic facing humanity right now is loneliness and isolation. And I'm not comparing it to the virus and everything else. It's just different, but it's been around before this self-isolation piece. Now what's happening is we're actually not even being allowed to connect with lots of people around us, see our parents and stuff like that. And I'm sure you guys are feeling some ramifications around that. Yeah. So I think what's happening is we're getting exposed. But one of the big challenges that we're just afraid to admit, particularly as men, I think it's a female and male thing, but particularly as men in business when we're struggling. And what we do is we almost remove ourselves from people around us. We isolate, we sit on the peripheral, and we'd rather be right than happy. We'd rather hold on to the pride. We'd rather hold on to this illusion and this mask that everything's okay and everything's awesome. And the reality is the pain that we're carrying, the uncomfortableness that we're carrying is actually such a weight and a burden. And yet every relationship in history has only deepened by an act of authentic vulnerability, which basically means that one person shares a part of themselves, the other person chooses to meet them, and the relationship gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And when vulnerability stops, the relationship flatlines or returns back to some sort of, top line conversation. And we're just afraid to allow people to see all of us because we've been building these frameworks of strength, and we need to hold on to that. And that is a really unfortunate, unnecessary thing. Yeah. And there's a lot of pain that comes from that.
No, it's well said. And, I think the power of this, Philip, is you're hitting on something really powerful. Getting back to our conversation at the Tilted Keg, we were able to support each other to a point. I was having trouble in the US, you're having trouble in Ireland real estate. So there were some things we could kind of coach each other on, but I really just think it was the fact that we could release to each other and listen. Yep. And just that gave some sort of inner strength and rejuvenation. So it's not even like I could solve all your problems or you could solve all mine, but just to be able to talk openly with someone about it and feel like, wow, I'm able to say this without someone shitting on me. Yeah. And I know that they have my back. It was really that clear where it's saying, well, that's not enough. I need to figure out all these things. But for me, sometimes that's just enough. I don't know about you, but that's something that I'm realizing.
I mean, I don't think I gave you any strategic, tactical, stuff that you.
That's what I'm saying. It would have been 10% of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. But the fact is that as you're holding on to an image of yourself that simply isn't true, that when you're hiding the pain that you're experiencing from everybody else and even trying to hide it from yourself, it just creates a sense of blockage where if you can release that, what ends up happening is the clarity that you need to identify, the questions you need to ask yourself, the actions that you need to take. And this is a time where I think we have this, it's twofold. One, we need to be executing. It's like a hummingbird. My favorite animal in the world, because a hummingbird moves its wings at 100 or 200 miles an hour. I don't know, but it feels like 1,000 miles an hour, and it can pivot and it can move and it can just move just like instantaneously. And I think that's where we need to be, but have the stillness in the middle. If you've ever seen a hummingbird, its wings are moving so fast, and yet the body of the hummingbird and the head is just almost perfectly still. And that is who and how we need to show up in the world today. We need to pivot like we've never pivoted before and reimagine like we've never done before. But at the same time, we need to also create space for stillness.
Yeah. I can't believe you just said that.
We saw our first hummingbird. So I have a deep tie to hummingbirds.
She's a
with
hummingbird
my grandmother.
Person of all things.
And in our room, in our glass room, I've been seeing butterflies, lots of nature. Our cat has brought 5 snakes in the last 48 hours to our house. Like he just keeps finding nature, but we were sitting in the back room actually talking about this interview yesterday. And I saw my first 2 hummingbirds in our yard. And I thought, it just felt.
She was listening to me even less. And I'm like, what's going on? She goes, look behind you. And there's
like,
two hummingbirds. And she was so happy. So anyway.
But I do have
that, first of all, that's cool. Because I saw you light up when I was saying, I'm thinking, okay, what's the hummingbird thing? The second thing is that we live in Boulder, Colorado. We've been in this home for 4 years now. Now, I don't know if this is true, but I cannot remember birds. Like we've actually commented sitting on our balcony when the sun is out, the absence of bird noise, the absence of songs, the absence of chirps, the absence of any type of bird activity. And in the last 3 weeks, it is absolutely insane. There is like hundreds of birds around our house. Now I'm wondering, we're not feeding them or anything like that. I'm wondering is either one, were they there? We just didn't hear them because we're so busy. Or two, are they emerging into Boulder because there's less smog in the air because of Denver or whatever. I don't want to read too much into it, but I think it's a combination of both. And I'm just curious, as much as I'd love to tell the world that I'm present and I'm all connected and everything else, you know, if I look back in my life prior to the virus, I was just too busy. And I mean, way too busy.
Yeah, it's power. And it's like, is it chicken or the egg? I think it's both, because we literally just had the same conversation. Philip, I've never seen the ocean as clear as it is here. And it might be that I've just slowed down to say, I'm going to enjoy this because I'm here. Or I think there's just less turbulence and movement and
waste.
So it looked like crystal clear Costa Rica here in Florida the last 2 days. Me and Jamie are going, wow. I mean, it's just, the clarity of the ocean and the visibility, it's just been incredible. So maybe there's something, these are the good things I think that are coming of this.
Well, and not to mention clear water and hummingbirds. Go ahead and get your ass here, Philip.
Yeah, totally. 100%. Well, we'll try and get there as soon as this thing dies down.
A visit coming on that. But
I wanted to get back. I wanted to ask you, Philip, when you were mentioning going deeper with the relationship that you had with Jim and how you placed he placed a vulnerability, and then you met that vulnerability, and you could either keep going, you know, in the relationship as you guys have done over the last 12 years, or you could stop and then you become stagnant and things change. How do you do this, bringing this back to family members, our spouses or our children? How do you, sometimes it almost feels easier in someone you've only known a year in a bar to say, okay, let's go here. Do you have anything that works really well for you in your relationship with Pauline or with your children that you can speak to, especially in these times when, you know, we may not want to talk to our children about what's happening, but we need to talk to our children ever so slightly, at least, about what's happening. And so that if they know that we are having a hard time, it's safe for them to say they're having a hard time.
Yeah, there's two things, particularly with children, that I believe to my core. Well, there's actually 3 things. Number one is I constantly underestimate my kids' capacity to hold space for me and for what might be considered deep dialogue or deep, kind of vulnerability. So that's number one. Number two is I think as parents, we have adapted this maybe from society, maybe from our own parents, is that you cry behind closed doors, you argue, you don't argue in front of your kids and so on. There's this idea that you need to protect your kids. And it's like putting cotton wool on every corner of every piece of furniture. And eventually your kids are going to fall and they're going to hurt themselves. And I'm not asking you to set them up for failure, and I'm not asking you to hurt them now so they're stronger. It's not what I'm asking. I'm just saying we try to protect our kids. And a lot of the times we're actually scared. We're not actually trying to protect our kids. We're trying to protect ourselves. We're still living out our own childhood, and we're trying to do the opposite for our kids. But I sat down with Charlie and Maggie, our 11 and 8-year-old, it feels like yesterday, but I think it was about 2.5 weeks ago, Jamie. And I said to them, listen, guys, I want to do something for I want to make sure that we're okay as a family. I want to make sure that we're okay individually. I also want to make sure we do something for our community, our neighborhood. And we did it. We wrote a letter and we et cetera. And to kind of almost an outreach. But the one thing I stopped and I said, I just want you guys to know, I'm not trying to scare you, but this is my truth, is I'm really scared right now.
Good for you.
And I will never forget the look on Maggie's face. And nor am I going to beat myself up for it. That's however she interprets that, that's her journey. It's not my responsibility. And I thought I had seen fear. with Harry Potter moments, as I describe them, or, you know, Lord of the Rings, or whatever these movies that and then they snuggle right into you, which I love. I love watching scary movies, not for them, but for me. So I get all the love, but, and that's purely selfish, but I'm going to admit that. But when I looked at her, I saw real fear for the first time, because she'd never seen her dad scared. And the challenge, and some parents might judge that, and that's your stuff. I'm not taking on that right now. And I'll tell you why I think it's important, is because when we grow up with parents that act strong, and we know they're vulnerable, and we know they're human, and we know that they're not perfect, the challenge is they inadvertently create this environment that we feel as kids we need to be the same, that it's not okay to open up to them. We need to be strong. We need to have it all figured out. And when we don't, what I did was internalize and said, you know what, McKernan, you're just not normal. You're no good, and you can't figure this shit out on your own. And the other thing is that I think most parents would wish that their children came to them if they had challenges. So we have this expectation that our kids should come to us, yet we're not willing to go first. We're not willing to create an environment where our kids feel safe to do that. So we don't realize that we're creating this full strength that our kids need to adopt, and therefore they don't know how to be vulnerable, which is being human. So I think we have a responsibility, a moral responsibility within reason. Okay, I'm not asking to download a bank balance and all the worries you have, but within reason, to allow our kids to see our humanity. And when we do that, they will return and reciprocate that in their own time. And people often wonder when their kids become teenagers, oh, it's a teenager thing, it's puberty, it's whatever. That's why my kid doesn't talk to me anymore. No, it's because maybe partly is that you just haven't created an environment along the journey. So when the 15-year-old or the 13-year-old or the 12-year-old has a struggle, they're not willing to come to you, and they keep it private. Now, there's always going to be maybe a little bit of that, but I really believe that we have a beautiful opportunity to connect with our kids through the lens of being real and vulnerable and open with them.
That's great. I can tell you, what you just said makes me think of one of my greatest failures that I shared, which I think years ago I would have thought pound on my chest. I took Leland for one of our meetings together. He went to the lighthouse, and he was terrified of heights, and we go through this whole thing. He slowly made it up the lighthouse, and he was just absolutely beaming. And we went to the beach afterwards, and we're climbing just on the jetty rocks, and we sat down, and he said to me with a straight face, Philip, he said, "Dad, have you ever been afraid?" And right there on those rocks, I felt like the biggest failure, because I knew I had been setting up this image that right away I said, have I ever been afraid? I had put up this thing that how could he relate to me? Because, you know, at 6, we're afraid about a bunch of things, whether it's the Harry Potters of those days or something. And I thought, wow. So right there on the spot, I said, oh man, I remember when I was your age, I got, pushed down at soccer practice, or a dog chased me in the neighborhood, and just started trying to rattle off as many things as I could. And from that day, it was a lesson to me that I still work with, that had he not said that day, how much more would he have continued to separate? Because he just couldn't relate to who I was. But it was where, the bravado male would say, yeah, that's right, he never thought you were afraid. You're going, that's a very serious, infectious disconnection right there.
Yeah. And the other thing that's come up just on that story that you shared, the other thing that has come up in me is this idea that our kids, I think as parents, and again, I'm only talking about myself, but I also witness this in the world that I live in, is that I think as parents, we begin to actually believe that our issues are the biggest issues in the world, and they're the only issues in the world. And we say things like, your daughter, your little kid runs into the office and it's like, Daddy, I lost my doll. And we're going to go, listen, that's no big deal. I'm trying to pay the mortgage. And what we don't realize in that moment is that her world is her doll. Her world is her doll, and my world, right or wrong, is the mortgage in that moment. And I'll always remember at a One Last Talk event, a 15-year-old young man walked up to me, gives me an embrace, which shocked his father because he doesn't hug anybody. And he was so moved, he just wanted to embrace me. Not by me, he wasn't moved by the speakers, moved by people in the room speaking. And the other thing that as the embrace parted, I said to him, I said, Matthew, I said, what was your number one takeaway from watching these speakers over the last 2 days? And he said, without missing a beat, he said, it's great to know that adults have problems too. And I think for teenagers, for young people, and I'm so guilty of this, but it's really being amplified, and I'm starting to really feel this, and some guilt, residual guilt for not being good enough in this area. I think a lot of parents are feeling a lot of guilt right now, is that I have not given enough credence to my kids' challenges, whether it's a computer game or a doll or whatever, because in my world, my problems have become so much more serious than the problems they have. And what I'm doing is I'm basically saying, your problem's not enough. Therefore, I'm saying you're not enough. And I'm repeating that every goddamn day. And very quick example of this is my wife years and years and years ago lived in Scotland for a couple of years. And when they moved from Ireland to Scotland or Scotland to Ireland, I can't remember, she was very, very young and they didn't have a lot of money. And she had a little pushchair and a doll. And I think I've shared this story with you, Jim, once.
I know this one, yeah.
But they forgot, they left her pushchair at home. They are not at home, but where they moved from. And when they got to Scotland, I think it was moving to Scotland, they unpacked everything. And the pushchair, the little doll pushchair was left behind.
Yeah.
You know, the greatest scheme of things, most adults might argue that, hang on, we're moving, we have to relocate, we have to do this. The pram is no big deal, but it crushed my wife at that time. Now, this came up at the ripe old age of 45. This is 2 years ago. And she remembered this memory and she felt awkward and embarrassed and silly, but at the same time talked about it as if it had happened yesterday morning. And the reason for that is we tracked it all the way down. Why did it bother you so much? She said, well, I don't know. It's silly. I said, no. Why did it bother you? She says, I felt like it wasn't important. I said, why did it bother you so much? All the way down to the point where she said, I felt I was unimportant, that they wouldn't remember the one of the only two things that I had in my life, a doll and a pushchair. And she said, as a young child, I internalized that as my stuff's not important, therefore I'm not important. And that has haunted her whole life. I'm not blaming our parents. It's just, that's what happens.
Yeah. No, and you're giving a powerful reminder where I've caught myself now, guilty as charged, as you said, where I said to the boys, you know, the older teens, what do you miss the most? What's hardest for you right now? And they've said, not hanging out with friends, not getting to go anywhere, not hanging out with friends. So they've said it twice, and I'm going, and I've caught myself, the same thing you said, my problems are bigger. And I thought, well, where would I have been at 14 if I couldn't get together with my buddies, which was just free flowing, walk out the door whenever you want after school and find them. And so I'm really trying to catch myself in the same thing. You know, we're all still learning. None of us have gone through this before, but we do have a habit, as you said, busy parents wanting to provide, protect, and love, but belittling their problems because you're right, ours are so much bigger. So that's an unbelievable point. I appreciate that greatly.
I would say as well, not just our children, but also our spouses. So oftentimes, you know, we're finding ourselves in these super close quarters right now. Generally, there's one spouse that provides the bulk of the income and the one spouse that provides the bulk of the housing or family care. And even if they're both providers, there's still one that probably carries business world a little more and one that carries home world a little more. And I think that it's really important, you know, as you're saying, you know, with our children, not to belittle their problems. Also with our spouses, I would say, right, Philip, you know, to just be mindful that right now is a super stressful time in business. Things are inconsistent and uncertain. They are at home too. We're all facing things that, like, none of us know what the hell we're doing anymore. You know, some of us might look like we're in a little bit better skill set, but honestly, you know, the kids having a meltdown, an epic meltdown, it can be the same volume as one of our clients having an epic meltdown.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think if you can find a rhythm in your relationship where one person is allowed to freak out while the other person holds space and then dovetail a little bit. And I use the word allowed because I think sometimes we don't give that space over. We're listening, but we're not hearing the other person. And I'd love to say I've mastered this. I'd love to say I've mastered anything in my life, which I don't think I have. And I think that's the point. I think that the minute you think you've mastered anything, you're screwed. And you can't master relationships because they are so emotional and they're so volatile and they're so amazing and they're so incredible and they move because the person is moving. And as the person moves, they grow. So you constantly have to find space. And I think that's one thing we've done very well is I think actually I've never said this before. I don't know how to describe this, but I think as we've grown in 14 years of marriage, there's been times where it's been, you know, really challenging and really tough. There's been times I've looked at my wife and said, why am I married to you? And I'm sure there's been tons of times before you get in, Jim, and say this, that she's looked at me and said, why have I married you? But
too easy. I'm not going to take that one. That was too,
that was too low. I want to go for the high fruit
right there.
I think, you know, you need to reinvent and reimagine your relationship as you move through it. But the other thing I always say to people is, and I do a lot of work with couples, and yet they're very surprised to hear me say that, is, you know, often couples, they settle into a relationship and they don't know how to reimagine it and how to shake things up and how to reimagine yourself. And if you're not growing independently from each other, that's, I think, where the biggest challenge comes in. I mean, an independent path, I think, is very important in relationships.
Yeah. And right now, as you said, reinvent, talk about a reinvention time for not only your marriage, for your children, for your career, your business. It's a huge issue right now. It's a huge question mark. And something that we've done, Philip, I wanted to ask you this question before we send off. You know, you and I learned some lessons in 2008. I think you hit on those about the power and importance of relationships and vulnerability, and not socking it away, and realizing that your family can support you. It's okay to share. But looking ahead, this is a game that I like to play. Not a game, but more of an exercise.
Yep.
You know, let's go 30 years out. Your 75-year-old self, okay? 75-year-old Philip McKernan. Hopefully he's still got some hair. He's still terrible at golf. Probably better than today, but still terrible. But in all seriousness, looking 30 years out, because we see how far you and I have come. We have a long way to go in 12 years since 2008. What do you think your 75-year-old self will be saying to the Philip today about this opportunity? You're home with your family. There's been business challenges. There's lots of people in need of help. But just looking at this overall, what do you think, with all that wisdom of 30 years ahead, the 75-year-old self would say to you today?
Hopefully that Jim Shields finally bought you a drink. That's not, but that's very unlikely. That's very unlikely based on historic data. I think the only thing that comes to me, and I almost feel like I'm trying to find something that's very inspiring, but the best thing that comes to me right now is this: is that you've. If he was speaking to me right now, he would say, "You've been here before. You got through it. And you were stronger, and you're actually going to be here again." And what I mean by that is not that we're going to have another virus, we're going to have another recession. We may have another virus, we may have another recession. But I want to just add a quote that I think solidifies this from somebody. He's a psychoanalyst called Donald Winnicott, who was born in the 1800s, and he shared something that I believe to my core. I just think he frames it better than I ever would. The catastrophe you fear will happen has in fact already happened. The catastrophe you fear will happen has in fact already happened. And what I mean by that is that when I'm honest with myself, which I think I've had to be very honest with myself over the last couple of weeks, am I worried about our business, the coaching, the events that we do as it relates to the current climate? Yes, I am. However, if I'm also honest, 90% of the concern and the worry I have is old. It's nothing to do with the virus, and it's nothing to do with today. The worry that I have, the greatest catastrophe I'm fearing, has already happened in my life. And the reason that I'm worried about it is because I know what it feels like to fail. I know what it feels like to be rejected. I know what it feels like to lose love. I know what it feels like to fail miserably and fall on my face. So a lot of my fear is not related to today. It's actually old fear that the old pattern will reemerge, the old story will rehappen again. And what's beautiful about that, I think, is that it allows, if you can separate the two, I think what will happen is you'll get a lot more strength and a lot more conviction and a lot more clarity about how to deal with today. So my 75-year-old self would look at me today and say, "You've been here before, you got through it, and by God, you were stronger. And you're going to be here again." And if I can imagine, not negative thinking, "Oh my God, if I just get through this," is you almost expect to be here again. So when it happens, it doesn't debilitate you to the extent that it has for many people in the globe today. And the second thing is, I think he would say, and I know you didn't ask for a second thing, but if you don't mind.
No, it's what would he say? Yeah.
I'm really proud of the way you handled yourself during this human crisis. I'm really proud, because that is the thing for me, is who am I going to be through this crisis, and how am I going to look back and remember myself? Because if I'm basing it, how am I going to be remembered by everybody else? That's external validation. That is my ego dying for attention. All I can do is, who am I going to be during this, and how am I going to remember myself? And that's what hopefully my 75-year-old self will say to me in a number of years from now.
I love it. Very good answer. Powerful. Very powerful. So, and we're asking that question a lot. For me, it was literally, this is the good stuff. So if there's a grumpy teen or a toddler meltdown, my 75-year-old self is going to go, "Oh, I missed that. Man, eat that up right now. Days are long, years are short. Eat that up. That's good. The other stuff, you'll work through it. You have before." But it's a wiser, bigger self. And you just proved that right there with, yeah, you've been here before. You're going to be here again. You're going to get through it. I mean, that's that's resolve. That's conviction without cockiness, which very well said. I'm impressed. And I don't say that to you a lot. So.
Yeah, I love that quote. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great quote. And I did share just before you came on, And I've never recorded, I don't believe I ever recorded like a meditation, but I wrote this thing on Facebook the other day, and it was about how I'm just basically processing my emotions right now. And I, like many people, go, oh, there's no system to it. There's no process. You know, it's just organic. And I sat down and actually wrote it. And I wrote it out. And there's 5 questions I ask myself, not every morning, but I sit and I just allow the emotions to consume me, to roll over me, through me. And I ask myself 5 questions to allow my emotions, which feel negative at the beginning, to come out the other end, and ask them how they're informing me. So I put that meditation in here, and I wasn't going to share it publicly at all. I mean this.
I appreciate that.
But so this is my first one ever recorded, so don't go hard on me, but I've just put the link in there if you want to give that out to your community.
And as we talked about,
we definitely will. Thank you, Philip.
And being in there, this is kind of, because Jamie and I were talking, how do we keep our feet on the ground? This is one of your main simple strategies to do just that. Exactly. Okay. Well, I could talk to you for hours. I would rather talk to Pauline than you, as we both know. She buys me beers, but we love you. We really appreciate it. We know that you are helping a lot of people right now. We know that none of us are immune to, you know, these big things where we're having friends in danger and issues with that. But I really appreciate how you're in a mindset of service. We've been staying in touch on a personal level and a professional level. And we just want to encourage you to keep up the good work, because we appreciate it. We know the difference it makes. We know that it's non-bullshit, which there's a lot of that out there. And it's something that I know is going to help our 18 Summers family community, which we appreciate you being a part of and so supportive of.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
Thank you all.
Yeah, likewise.
Well, thanks again, Philip. We'll see you soon.
Guys.